Here is the problem with minimalism. Of course, there's a problem with everything, so there also just might be a problem with minimalism. The thing about minimalism is this: it's only a method. Therefore, it's also a philosophy, and of course, it depends on whether you're searching for the method and applying the method, or if you're really into the philosophy, and therefore include not only the method of minimalism, but also just view minimalism as a broader life philosophy that also includes other methods. What is the essential method minimalism is? Well, it's essentially a statement. It's essentially an axiom. It's essentially not really an axiom, but rather just an assumption that getting rid of stuff gives you a better life. Now, the thing is, this only works in a certain range, because let's face it, we all need stuff. If you are saying or preaching to a homeless person that has only one shirt, one pair of shoes, and one pair of pants, and you are preaching to them, oh, minimalism is the best thing ever. Just get rid of all your stuff. Just get rid of the pants, the shirts, maybe also the shoes. Then probably the method of minimalism fails here. What it doesn't fail is the minimalism philosophy. Meaning, if you also include other things, and if you, also include other things. Now, the thing is about the method minimalism. Let's take a closer look what it actually is. It actually is, just as I stated, an assumption. An assumption that getting rid of one more item, basically forming it into a mathematical method, and trying to maybe put all of this into a graph, into a picture, into a visualization. Of course, there are different scenarios. If somebody has like 20 homes all over the earth, and I don't know how many items of clothes or how many pieces of clothing, then essentially he has very many items. And on the other side of the spectrum, you have someone who already owns almost nothing. For him, getting rid of one other unit, of one other marginal unit, of course you could also say there is a smaller unit than the unit itself. This would mean in mathematical terms that the graph actually would not look like this, one other item, but it would actually be discrete, meaning it would be defined at every single value, also at 0.9999 or 5 or 0.67. It doesn't really matter. It would just be defined at every single point along the line. Now, or along the axis. Now the thing is, minimalism only is a method and only works and only has a benefit within a certain range. And the assumption also kind of with minimalism is this: most of us have too much stuff. This means most of us start out not on the spectrum of being a millionaire and having like 20,000, the thing I wanted to say is the other way around. Most of us don't start out as someone who only owns one pair of pants, one pair of shoes, and one shirt. But most of us are more on the spectrum of more on the extreme side of a millionaire. Therefore, getting rid of stuff. So basically, what I'm trying to say is there's an optimum. There's an optimum for each and every person between those two extremes. And between those two extremes, you need to find the optimum. And this optimum is different for every single person, because every single person has different needs. Of course, this is a general statement, and we as humans are pretty similar. Compared to a tree or compared to a planet, we are pretty similar, do have pretty similar needs. Therefore, we all need a shelter, we all need clothes, we all need, these days, a smartphone, let's face it. We all need internet, we all need water, we all need food. These are like the basic needs. Of course, smartphone and internet are not really considered the basic needs, but sleep, food and water, or food and water, or if you include water already in food, these are the basic items everyone needs according to like Maslow's hierarchy. So there's a hierarchy of needs for humans developed by someone called Maslow, probably Russian. And this dude, it's developed this pyramid, and then there is a second layer. The second layer is maybe a job and maybe money and stuff like this. And then there is the fulfillment layer. I mean, my depiction is not accurately because I saw it like 5 years ago, but the basic concept is this: everybody has needs, and whether you fulfill these needs with stuff, or whether stuff actually makes you more likely to fulfill these needs in your life, or in every single moment get these fulfilled, depends on the person. But on average, people are pretty similar. Now, therefore, we all have kind of the same needs, but only at a basic level. Then it gets more diverse. Now the thing is, with minimalism, it assumes that we all have kind of too much stuff. Therefore, the method of actually getting rid of stuff actually does some good. And we are not all homeless persons with only a few items, or already minimalists that are so reduced that getting rid of one other unit of stuff or one other item would actually also decrease their overall life, not really worth the use, you could say, or just overall the outlook on life. If you get rid of a car, but you need a car to drive to work every single day, and there is no other option, and no other transportation option. Of course, you could cycle every day to work. I mean, this would be an option, but if it's 200 kilometers, then maybe it's not an option, because then you are sleep deprived every single day, because essentially you cannot sleep anymore. I mean, it depends on the person, but the assumption, again, is that most of us, because we live in a kind of consumption society, we're just buying stuff, where the opposite actually is true. So minimalism is essentially getting rid of stuff makes you more happy, or happiness just as an approximation to overall life satisfaction, including every single variable that goes into how you feel about your life. And of course, feeling about your life is not really the thing you want to be searching for, but it's rather just an equation that includes everything and just puts out a single measurement that measures how good your life actually is. I mean, you could feel great if you, for example, I don't know, eat junk food all day, but the thing is, or if you don't do anything like for 10 years, you just sit around. But other people, but the thing is, down the line, if you just, for example, sit around all day and do nothing, then problem down the line is that you maybe don't have health insurance to cover yourself when you are 70, 80 and you are kind of dying of cancer. This creates a problem down the line. Therefore, you also need to apply this, not only this method of minimalism, but also you need also to count in the time, basically, and how you develop over time. So basically, you take all the values of your life, of the life index, and then you just also count in all the other versions of you, of all the other life indexes. And therefore, we have a life index for the whole life of a person. And if this whole life of a person increases, or if the satisfaction or this index just increases, assuming the better, so the higher the number, the better. If this increases by getting rid of another unit, then it's beneficial. But it's not beneficial, or malevolent, you could also say, if it's the other way around. The thing about our society these days is, and also the assumption of minimalism kind of, and also you have to be a minimalist because everything else is bad. If, for example, a boy gets a football, and it was the thing he longed for for weeks and weeks, but the family just didn't have the money for this specific football, or just didn't want to give it to the boy, then for the boy, of course, it's a pretty big thing. I mean, sometimes this happens that then you try the thing, but it actually is not what you expected. That's another entire story. The story I'm trying to tell, or the point I'm trying to make rather, is that this consumption thing is only people buy stuff in order to get happier. There is nothing around it. But people do also buy the exact same stuff for actually needing the stuff. And there is not really a distinction, but the distinction is just the intention and also what you do with it afterwards. And it doesn't really matter what you do with it afterwards, because I mean, you could make an argument that we need to criticize everybody that buys something but then doesn't need it, but or use it. But the thing is that I'm just driving and there are just like gigantic rotor blades on the side of the highway, basically, and they were just like, well. Now back to minimalism. Getting these rotor blades, for example, would maybe, in general, for the average population on Earth, be beneficial, because it actually would increase the probability that we actually do things or are able to make things like the energy revolution possible. But if we did just got rid of these without actually using them, I mean, I guess the opposite would be true. Therefore, what I'm trying to say is this. It's not that there is a problem with minimalism in general. It's just that every thumbnail these days, or every clickbait title ever, basically states that there's a problem with this, because we as humans are interested in problems and not in solutions. This is also the reason why in newspapers you find negative news all the time. Therefore, that's another entire story. But also kind of with minimalism, because you could also make an argument for information minimalism. If you just didn't read the news, because basically, if the news are primed negatively, or on average more negative, because people tend to like, or not really like, but if there is negative information, then actually we are kind of evolutionary, from an evolutionary point, primed into, do I need to do something about it? And if everything's okay, then you just don't need to act. Therefore, you don't really need the information. Or, just trying to explain this argument. This could also mean information minimalism. It's just getting rid of stuff in your life may make you happy. It doesn't always, and it's just a method, but that only applies to almost everyone these days, because essentially, if we just get rid of stuff, and most of us do have too much stuff. For example, if you got, or I have like 20 short pants, sport pants, but only 2 of them have zippers. This means that whenever I do sport, I can only put in something that doesn't get lost when I do any kind of sport. Having zippers in sport shorts is actually kind of useful, and therefore the other are just items I don't really need and I don't really use. Therefore, just maybe getting more sport pants that have, or sport shorts that have zippers, is actually quite a useful thing, at least for me. But only if I need more. Now there's an argument that the more stuff you have, the more time you need to manage all the stuff. And of course that's kind of true. But it only depends. It depends on you. It depends on the fact that sometimes your overall life index increases by adding another item, and sometimes it actually decreases. That's essentially the argument. It depends on you. But since most people are in this range where getting rid of stuff actually would make them happier, because they wouldn't have to think about all the stuff, and therefore they actually would kind of get rid of this. If you think about the human brain as a computer, then there are all these sub-programs running all the time. One of these is tracking all the locations of your items. Where are your keys? Where is your phone? Maybe also, if you get like a huge wardrobe, you need to make sure it's clean all the time. You could also make sure it's not clean all the time, but then whenever you wanted to use it, it wouldn't be there for you to use it. Therefore, adding another layer. I think the more general method is this: functionalism. Basically stating that every item you have needs to have a function. It doesn't matter if it's a real function or if it's just for psychological purposes. This can mean that owning a car gives you the feeling that you are rich. This could mean that having a nice suit, for example, and actually wearing it to work could mean that you feel better at work, and therefore you are able to focus more on your work, and therefore your work is better, and therefore you provide more value to others and also to yourself, because you, in exchange for the work, get money. The thing is everything needs to have a function. And if the function could also be that, so for example, you could make an argument that a statement, or you could make an argument for actually not doing anything sometimes. It's called meditating. Just getting rid of all the thoughts you have. And it's the same with stuff. I mean, but essentially, when you are already meditating, then meditating already has a function. I mean, and even if it doesn't have a function, just because you do it, it already has a function for you. Because otherwise you just wouldn't do it. That's the basic assumption. I mean, you could say that the assumption excludes basically this thing. But what any rational human mind would say is the assumption that anything we do has some purpose, and even if the purpose is having no purpose. Yeah. So back to functionalism. Every item needs to have a function, but the function doesn't need to be like a proper function. It could also just be that you feel good about it. It could also just be that you like to have this item in your home and do nothing about it. I mean, why do we decorate stuff? Because it's exactly this thing. Why do we buy art that somebody else made and we have no affiliation whatsoever? Because we can feel good and we can tell stories about it to our friends. They are like, oh, well, you're so sophisticated. You bought this painting and it was like 2 million. So now, if you got rid of the painting, for example, you would also get rid of the function of telling your friends how good you are or how sophisticated you are. It doesn't really matter. And it doesn't also really matter if someone judges you for this behavior. The thing that matters is whether it has a function for you and to you. And therefore, minimalism, is there a problem with minimalism? Not really. It's just a neutral method. And the general philosophy of minimalism applies to almost everyone these days, living, of course, only in developed countries, or mostly. Yeah. And that's the thing I'm trying to say. And that's, I guess, the point I'm trying to make. And that's the end of the problem with minimalism.